In this episode of Ask the Expert, the independent investor sits down with the founder of Humble, a circular economy startup working alongside small businesses and top corporations to reduce waste on both sides of our e-commerce marketplaces. We discuss his experiences co-founding Humble, their recent $750,000 seed round, his own personal advocacy for championing psychological safety in the workplace, and the role he sees Humble playing in a more circular, sustainable future. The independent investor's expert today is none other than Josef Werker. Well, thank you so much for carving out time in your Thursday afternoon. You guys have been pretty busy these past couple of weeks. I guess all startups have been busy with Philippine Startup Week, but how have these past weeks been for you guys?
Everyone's extremely busy. Philippine Startup Week, obviously, pretty much anyone in the industry is either taking part in events, speaking at events, or just excited by the fact that we've got all of these VCs turning up in the Philippines, which is fantastic, and so many more than normal. But for Humble, I think he's talking about we've just raised a little bit of money, so we've just announced a seed round essentially with some really exciting investors, and it's for us it's not about the capital, but everything else that these guys actually bring is fantastic. So it's been a nice way to kind of celebrate just a little bit of a milestone, and now the hard work really starts.
So I want to dive into the circular economy. I want to dive into a number of the topics about psychological safety, taking mental health seriously. I mean, all these different things that you guys are passionate about at Humble. But before that, you did mention a recent milestone, which is the seed round, right? So you guys recently raised $750,000, which is fantastic. And a fantastic seed round in the context of the Philippines, regionally, and however way you want to cut it. I'm just curious, maybe this is a good opportunity to take a step back and describe, so what's Humble all about? What's your story been getting to this point, getting to the seed raise, and where you're headed?
Sure. Yeah, well, firstly, thank you. People told me that we were absolutely crazy raising now in this climate.
I was gonna say, yeah.
but it was such a fantastic ride. But we'll get there. Okay, so look, Humble in a nutshell, we are a circular economy startup, and we make returns and excess inventory the hero. Right, so we help companies earn revenue from essentially the inventory, the stuff which everybody else kind of forgets about, the stuff that might end up in landfills. These are returns, these are aging products, items with damaged packaging, stuff like that. And as e-com continues to just boom and do extremely well, of course, this area of stuff also really grows along with it. So it becomes a very significant problem. So we take that and we have a couple of channels. So we sell the top quality items on Thrift, which is our own circular living e-com store. And then everything else goes to our network of B2B recyclers, resellers, upcyclers, and so on and so forth. And we're just about to launch the first version of our B2B platform as well. So that's what we are today, but that's definitely not what we were at the beginning, right? We sort of shifted our model to that towards the beginning of this year, sort of very tail end of last year. Prior to that, it was a bit different. We focused a little bit more on homes and taking stuff that people are not using from their homes. And I love that business. It's not massively scalable in the way that we did it, but we really like that business. And it's, I think, what people kind of enjoyed about Humble as a brand at the start. And we had there was a moment we had 30,000 people on our waiting list, and thousands of slots were gone in 4 minutes of us opening the platform. So the demand was there, but making that really scalable and quality, there's a lot more tech that needs to happen in order to do that. So that's something we will pick up again, potentially at a later date. It will look a little bit different. But anyway, we decided to kind of pivot a little bit towards focusing on helping logistics, e-com, and retail companies with their stuff that they cannot deal with themselves.
So maybe we can focus on that pivot. I'm really curious about it. So
yeah.
a few I gotta say, I mean, time is crazy at this point in the pandemic. I don't know if it was a month ago or a year ago, but some time ago, I was lucky enough to do a webinar on the circular economy, and I was introduced to the butterfly diagram. I'm sure you're very familiar with it. These series of concentric circles, right, where you have users at the center, you have service providers, then product manufacturers, parts manufacturers, right? So it seems that you initially focused on users, which is to say in the getting, say, used monitors, right? Computer monitors, and collecting it from them. But then you recently did that pivot towards working with service providers, or B2B. So I'm just curious, could you describe like how that pivot was for you guys? What spurred it? Like what was the insight that told you guys, we got to switch gears?
Yeah, so so it's interesting because the supply chain there, we can work with every single bit of it, and we kind of see ourselves as this sort of bucket at the bottom that catches all of the stuff that falls off, right? I think really the pivot was driven by a combination of just pure luck and being opportunistic, and sort of just noticing that the business we were in, the model that we were in, could have made it work, but the opportunity that arose was just so much more scalable. So in a nutshell, I mean, the obvious problems with going to different people's homes and getting their items, that means without a lot of tech infrastructure, that's a very heavy operational business, right? So we would go from door to door, collect their items, bring them back to our own sorting facility, and then recyclers and upcyclers would come and take that, and the sorting was also a nightmare. So number one, there's lots of transport, and we didn't really sit well with us that is considerably impacting the environment in itself. There's just so much logistics going on. And then the second part was the quality of the items was of course very, very mixed and extremely random. The difference between, let's say, a beautiful e-com electronics store giving us thousands of aging products in comparison to a home which has got bits of plastic here, bits of my Lolo's old clock over here, and like all of that stuff. And it's just extremely difficult to predict what kind of stuff is going to come your way. So that added towards the manpower of being able to sort things, and it just became logistically heavy, and without a lot of tech infrastructure kind of in place, to very sophisticated to be able to help automate different bits of that. The scalability was just not happening at the same kind of rate that we wanted. So we actually sort of stumbled upon this opportunity because of one of our advisors at the time. So one of our advisors was working at one of the top logistics businesses in the country, and basically said, like, look, I've got all of these quality returns sitting in my warehouse, and the options right now I have for this are just not great. I don't earn very much money from it, and it's a hassle. I can't get it out of my warehouse quick enough. Just all of these different issues were occurring. And then that was kind of the light bulb moment to, okay, let's give that a go. Let's see if this is something interesting. And from there, it's took its path.
So I know that you started working with companies like Ninja Van and Loka. Now you're also working with companies like Google, Robinsons, Union Bank. Could you tell me about how, like, that jump?
Sure. So we work with those guys in slightly different ways. So the Robinsons of the world and like Citibank, Union Bank, for them, we essentially, that was actually part of the home collection side. So that was the previous model, where we would basically go to their employees' homes and we would collect the items that they no longer want, and then bring them back into circularity. Plus, we did other things. We did sort of office decluttering. So we take the office chairs, and there's a moment we took a bunch of different furniture and office chairs from Procter & Gamble and a few other businesses like that. So that was really nice because it was great for the business, because they have this, sort of modern, slightly more forward-looking way of doing something culture building and their CSR. And for us, again, we get to work with these incredibly inspiring companies, plus get access to all of these
right.
items. So that was more towards the previous model. The existing model is really focused at the moment heavily towards retail, e-commerce, and logistics. This is where we've been working with Ninja Vans of the world and Trago, so on and so forth. Yeah. So,
I mean, even prior to that pivot, then it seems like you were already looking for opportunities to make this a more scalable venture, right? And more sustainable, right? Finding those kind of community hubs, right? Or those partners. You talked about e-commerce as your focus in logistics. From your vantage, you're running this for 2 years now, I understand, or thereabouts. What is the big issue around sustainability with the e-commerce industry? E-commerce is only rising here on out, and sustainability is a hot button topic, for all stakeholders involved. From your perspective, like, what is the issue here that you guys are trying to solve?
So I mean, massive, obviously, and again, we are trying to do our part, and we want to do a massive part, but obviously it's going to take a lot more than a few environmental startups to make this happen. I mean, just look, the numbers are staggering, right? The numbers on itself are just quite scary. I think so. 2020, 2 billion tons of returns ended up in the landfill, which is just mad, right? 2 billion tons of returns, not even sort of really poor condition waste and plastic packaging. That's another issue. What was that? It was 900 million kilograms of plastic packaging waste ends up every single year in the landfill, specifically because of e-commerce. So just the numbers alone are obviously unbelievable. And the reason for that is it's really cost, right? And competing with each other in order to get the advantage, and taking sustainable methods for both of those issues doesn't give you at the moment an advantage commercially, and that's really the issue, right? And there's no one at the moment really regulating or trying to put into place things that can potentially prevent that. So, for example, let's explain a little bit more about the returns issue first, right? Because actually it's not really talked about, I think, anywhere near as much as it should be. But the reason why a return might end up in a landfill is the following. So first, I try and go and deliver it to the end customer, and they're not there. They don't pay cash on delivery. They don't have cash. That's huge in Southeast Asia, cash on delivery and not being home or just not being there. They might refuse the item, might be the wrong item. There's a ton of different reasons, right? I think it's no secret that a lot of items get returned. We're just over 30%, I think, at the moment in terms of the number of e-com items that are actually returned. From there, in a perfect world, this all goes straight back to the merchant, right? So logistics company goes back to the hub, gets it back to the seller. Now, that actually fails to happen on quite a frequent basis, more than you would really sort of logically assume. And that's for a number of reasons. So we could have missed the SLA in order to get it back to them. In that case, I have to buy it myself as the logistics company. It might have been damaged in transit, might be lost and then later found and it's too late. Or the seller may have just sent another one back out to the end user anyway, because they want to get this done fast and have a good rating. And by that point, they just flat out refuse it to have it back from the logistics company. And then the logistics company either says, no, I'm going to force you to have it back and risk that relationship, or take the hit on that item. So it's quite dated, really. It feels like those issues. But what the result is, because this is so fast moving, because the priority for everyone in that supply chain is speed, the issue is that a lot of this stuff just ends up just taking up space in warehouses. And from there, they have a choice. Either they have a system in place where they can liquidate this, earn from it, and kind of reduce some of that cost. The problem there is that those options are not always easy, or there's not many of them. Hence, this is why we kind of came in to tackle a solution. But very often, these items then end up in a landfill. And that's where this 2 billion comes from. And the reason for that is because to deal properly with returns, whether as the logistics side or the seller itself, repacking, returning, this costs money. It costs extra. And they haven't baked that in to their costs for that unit economics of that item. And that's why it ends up just being completely forgotten about. So I think that's a problem. That's a real problem. Of course, there are those trying to tackle this issue themselves. Others are not focused on it as much, so on and so forth. And then on the other one, plastic packaging, I think this is talked about more, which is great. And I do believe that whoever conquers sustainable packaging properly first is like one of the next massive unicorns. But it's just a massive problem. It's not often sustainable packaging is either expensive or it's not accepted by some of the main couriers and stuff like that. And that's something we must change.
I think you described a number of like really fascinating interlocking systems, right? That are incentivizing. I mean, maybe you could call it flippant, like a flippant attitude towards sustainability. And again, it's whose fault is that really, right? If the sellers are pushed to operate in this way, right? So I think it's an incredible approach that you guys are taking. I'm looking now at Thrift, your store, Thrift by Humble, and I see here you have men's fashion, you have automated motorcycles, women's fashion, babies and toys. You know, it's a whole spectrum of different products. I want to get into Thrift, and maybe you could tell me a story about that. But before that, just to could further contextualize what you were just describing, let's take the example of fashion, right? So clothes, secondhand clothes. Like, what is that? How do clothes move through this supply chain, through the circular economy?
So clothes is by far the worst contributor, right? And you just look at like, so transportation, for example, of like items in this world is it was 15 million metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions were caused in 2020, and last year it got even worse. And clothing is really responsible for a massive chunk of all of that. And I think it's fast fashion, and I'm not saying anything new here, right? But fast fashion is the problem. And again, when you look at this whole supply chain and the issue of trying to make secondhand okay, or dealing with returns okay, and bringing this stuff back into circularity once something's happened with it, we need to look at a lot of things. And secondhand, when it comes to clothing in particular, really, really suffers because people buy and throw away too quickly. That's obvious, that's a behavioral thing. But the other side is that the material these days, empowered by fast fashion, is extremely cheap. So it breaks down really, really quickly. So secondhand being rewashed, lots of transportation, the stuff just doesn't stay in a good stead compared to other categories, which is slightly, quote unquote, kind of easier to make circular solutions around. Having said that, there are a lot more startups and solutions and innovations focusing on clothing, right? There's a lot. So it's a lot more further along than most other categories, both in terms of what you do with the actual material and also other kind of tech solutions for trying to make secondhand okay. Look at ThreadUp in the US, massive, like a complete idol of ours from when we built the business from the beginning. Their first, just a random side note, the way I only learned this recently actually, but like our first ever concept of Humble wasn't even the one we talked about earlier. It was actually a circular solution for children's clothing, and how, you know, when a kid grows out of their things in about 5 minutes,
right,
you need to bring that clothing to another kid who can grow into it, and just simple as that. And I just heard that was exactly the same as ThreadUp's first ever concept, which is really cool. Like we're huge fans of theirs. But anyway, so the rise of fast fashion has made circular solutions for clothing extremely difficult. I was doing a talk recently, and the numbers here are even more frightening. You know, one of the biggest concepts of how can I do something good with the excess clothing I have is let's donate it, right? There's all of these great Goodwill, etc., massive in the US, all these wonderful places that accept donations or straight to charity. But I couldn't believe this and needed to read it and learn about it a lot more. Less than 1% of the clothes that are actually donated are ever recycled into new ones, ever. So it's just crazy. And tens of millions.
Why is that? What happens to the other 99%? Are they just not wearable?
There's just too much, right? So most of this stuff goes to, number one in the world is Ghana, okay, and second is India, for where the stuff actually lands. And it just comes in the crater load, just containers and containers every single week. So resellers do their best, and there's just too much. And it's that either there's too much volume, they can't get it done quickly enough, or there's too much which is in an unsellable state. And that's because it's made of poor material, it just breaks down, etc., etc. So next, most ends up just purely as waste. So it's a massive issue. And the reason why there's so much getting there in the first place, again, is because of this behavior that we have, and we are continually decreasing the amount of times that we wear stuff, right? I think it's like 36% in the last 20 years decrease in how many times we actually wear something. And it's becoming so popular to wear something once, a photo on Instagram, and if I can ever be seen in a second photo on Instagram wearing that same thing, that is like appalling in front of everybody that I know.
Yeah, you might as well delete your account. So, okay, I mean, out of curiosity then, whether it's clothing, whether it's electronics, right, whether it's automotive parts, how exactly does Humble, and maybe Thrift as well, Thrift by Humble, how do you guys tackle those issues? Where do you situate yourself in that, in amongst all those moving parts?
Okay, so thank you, great question. So what we do is we essentially try to take anything that is forgotten by the businesses within the supply chain. So whether it is the distributor, whether it's the store, the logistics, even the marketplace and the enablers, really anyone there, they will encounter this in some way or another. It could be the failed returns that we've talked about, the logistics companies. It could be slow moving products that I'm just struggling to sell. They're in perfect condition, but it's last season perhaps, therefore it's not as relevant now. I need a hand to sell it. It could be something with slight damage or the packaging is damaged, but it's still functional. So most of the time. So we would take all of that and then we have two channels essentially. If it's of a certain level of quality and high enough value, then we put it on Thrift, which is our own e-com store. So what you'll see there is mostly electronics. Again, you saw some fashion items, home and living, appliances, and these all work perfectly well. There might be slight things like, for example, there might be damaged packaging, but we'll put that really clearly there. And so the whole concept of Thrift is really simply three things. It's number one, where can I get really high quality items? The second is, where can I get it 30% cheaper than literally anywhere else online? And then the third is, where can I shop sustainably? So that number one, I'm potentially saving this actual item that could have ended up in a landfill. And second, because they're buying from Thrift, we're preventing another new item being produced, replacing that in the supply chain. So that's really the concept, extremely simple. And you know, we could have gone out and built a Thrift which is purely based around secondhand stuff. But there's a lot of that. There's a lot of people doing that very well, right? ThredUp does that brilliantly. Carousel, again, we're huge fans of all of these guys. But we saw an opportunity where we can have Thrift for stuff which is actually in perfect conditions, never been used, but it's just been forgotten about. So that's everything that goes on Thrift. Now, there's of course sometimes stuff which is not in that level of condition or quality. So for that, we have a B2B network of recyclers and resellers who can take this stuff in bulk. So I'll just give you an example. Recently, we had 15,000 pieces of baby accessories, but very, very kind of low value. And I just can't imagine this stuff selling well on Thrift. So we decided to keep it off the platform and see which kind of businesses, and actually we've got some of the big retail companies involved and so on and so forth who can buy this in bulk and then they can use that to support their business. Even better, we've had some kind of local, really sort of mum and pop Philippine local businesses, and they can source us for their inventory. So it's extremely cheap, it's sustainable, and it helps them kind of with their product depth. So that goes there. So again, people help there are thrifters who can buy sustainably at great prices, businesses who can also buy sustainably at great prices. On the other side, for the e-com or retail company who gave us those items, they are able to earn a lot more revenue from those items than they could have done through other channels because of the price points that we can sell on Thrift, right? It compared to kind of traditional liquidation channels, that revenue recovery is quite significant.
Fascinating. Maybe just a brief aside there. Who does the curation work when you receive these items? Who decides this goes on Thrift, this goes for recycling, this goes to our B2B channels? It sounds like, is it you?
Yeah, so of course, like day one is me and my co-founder, right? Like,
yeah.
Trying to figure out what goes where. But,
sifting through piles and piles of things, yeah.
Definitely, but that's, you know, no founder is telling the truth if they haven't done that stuff. And it's very important that you do that stuff, by the way, because you get to really understand everything. You get to understand the customer, you get to understand your future warehouse team. You get to have proper empathy of every ounce of your business. And I'm so thankful that we still do that, right? Like Nina, my co-founder, she's amazing at that. She literally is, she speaks to every single, individual who comes by us. And I'm constantly saying to her, like, what are you doing? I've got to be a bit more macro than that sometimes. And then I suddenly realized, no, she's absolutely right. Like, we've got to be touching every single piece and learning a lot. So she teaches me a lot on that side. Anyway, we digress. So who does the sorting? Today, this is on Humble's end. So first, we receive the list, the data of the item before we ever touch it. From there, we do an assessment. From that, we can already research online the best available price elsewhere. We can understand the condition, the photos, we can look at various trends. And then from there, we can already establish, okay, because of the price, the condition, and the trend, this will go on Thrift, this will not. That's kind of the criteria. Of course, just simply from a margins standpoint as well as a business model, if it's lower in value and I've got more cost because selling on Thrift means marketing and product uploading, it makes less sense. So the higher the price point overall also makes sense to be on the platform. And there are some things that are just not appropriate for individuals versus businesses. We recently tried to start selling like a bunch of sinks and stuff on Thrift and ended up realizing this is a headache. So we took it off the platform, it was gone in a day. So that's today's process. And then when we inbound the items, we do another level of QC to just cross-check, because at the beginning especially, it's extremely important that everything that goes on Thrift, what we say is completely accurate. Because again, and I'm sure you can anticipate this, how often maybe you've written it or you've received it, you hear the phrase, is this really legit? Happens on Shopee all the time, it's on Lazada, happens to us, of course, all the time. Like, how come you have this great item extremely cheap? I don't understand, what's the catch? So for us, building trust is so important. Later, we bring technology into this, and that's the IP that we will build in-house, is being able to automate elements of the QC process, being able to have trawling so that these items can directly be uploaded by a warehouse manager from a company Y straight into our system. And then from there, based on different recognition and experience, we'll know what goes on Thrift and what goes to the B2B platform. We're definitely not there yet. That will take a little bit further. That's 2023. But yeah, today it's a lot of physical, let's sort this stuff out ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, Joseph, you touched on something really fascinating there. I think Nina's work is essential in touching base with every single stakeholder, because that's how you build trust, as you mentioned. But when it comes to your community, your consumers, right, the customers on Thrift, how is it that you go about building trust at scale?
That's a great question. So, look, trust there's so many ways, and it cannot possibly happen overnight. Number one is just branding, right? Being and getting it out there that this is a real initiative, and I think being as informative as possible and just explaining ourselves as to really, like, where did the items really come from? What's the source? And answering questions head on, difficult questions head on, and not kind of tiptoeing around it. So just complete transparency across the board. So we, for example, where the items come from always comes up, and why are you able to sell it so cheap? So we try and constantly communicate these things as much as possible, because when people understand the concept, then it's absolutely fine. It's like, okay, I get it. It came from this situation where they couldn't sell it, but it's actually in great condition and it's super cheap. Therefore, I trust you enough to buy it. But that happens. That obviously happens over time. So one is branding and education. Reviews, of course, really help. So you need to get a little bit of traction. So the beginning was tough, but after a while, once you have a few thousand people who are saying great things about your products, of course, it gets easier. So that's another one. And then I think credibility as a business, having that trust stamp of people understanding who we are. So we're really keen to, partner with more wonderful businesses and kind of share our story. We've been very quiet to date, to be honest. Like we've not really wanted to say much. We're not those kind of people. We like kind of just quietly building and trying to let our actions speak louder than words. But I think now is the time to talk a bit more about it. And the final thing I think is really the building the ability that there's less risk to buy. So, and you can do that in many ways, but the way that we do it is really through a very strong returns policy that we educate about, plus has a nice circular edge to it. So if your item becomes faulty with us, let's say even after 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, then we will give you a refund minus a rental fee for how long you had it working. So let's say, for example, the item costs, for the sake of argument, 12,000 pesos, because there's 12 months, and that's easy maths. Then you had it for, let's say, 4 months, and for whatever reason it became faulty, and it doesn't work anymore. We will then refund you the entire amount minus the rental fee of 1,000 for those 4 months. So you'd get 8,000 back, and we charge you 4,000 for the rental. Which that hopefully takes away any worry that at the very least, my risk is going to be, okay, I'm going to rent this item for a few months until something happens to it. So a few ways we're trying to tackle that.
So it sounds like you've identified an incredibly compelling issue, or incredibly a global issue here. You've mapped out the ecosystem beautifully, and clearly you made a compelling enough venture that you've managed to raise like this impressive seed around. How has, the pivots aside, how has Humble as a startup grown since you, let's say, since you you graduated from the Idea Space Accelerator program? How have you guys as a venture grown and matured?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I mean, you look at yourself a year ago and you always think, what were you doing? I think that goes for every bit in life, whether it's a haircut or a fashion sense. Same in how we went about managing Humble, I think, So we've really grown in many ways. I mean, I think just sheerly by the people who are now involved, I think is also quite a good realization of where we are, and that we've clearly matured enough to have people on board who can really make an epic difference. And it's like just the investors, the advisors, like what they bring is something so much more compelling than capital that's really allowed us to go in a different direction. Again, hands up, like, and this is called Ask the Expert, right? Like, it's, for me, it's the completely, I'm so sorry, completely the wrong title, because I know nothing about sustainability other than being extremely passionate. What I mean is I'm not an environmental scientist. The second is I've never worked or been in e-commerce or logistics before. All of my investors right now are like, shut up. But like, really, my experience is not in that field. And this is just something that we're extremely passionate about. And the reason I'm saying that is because I think what was very important, even early, but like more throughout the time, is bring in other people who know so much more than you do about all these different elements. And so, like, we went on this 6-month task of not necessarily like raising funds, of course, that came with it because you want them to be attached to it, and that's how you do it. You need to put money in to really be properly, literally invested. But it was about identifying people who are experts in each of these different areas, who all bring something very unique and different, so that they can help us continue to mature as an organization. And so now, I personally have these 1-hour talks every single month with all of them, and it completely changes the game, right? We're able to absorb all of this intelligence and knowledge and experience from people, and what we're okay at doing is being able to know how to ask the right questions and how to extract different bits from people's brain who are so much smarter than we are. So I think that's one of the biggest ways in which we've really evolved. We've identified what we're not good at. We've identified who are the best people at those things and brought them in to help us in some capacity.
So Joseph, I mean, just talking about your team now, I think it's an important topic to also talk about the culture that you cultivate at Humble, the environment that you build, one of psychological safety, right? One that supports the sharing of ideas. I mean, could you speak a bit about the culture at Humble?
Yeah, sure. And I'm really pleased that you mentioned psychological safety, because that is something which I'm extremely passionate about, and I will never stop believing in, because I really think that again, I can only talk for myself. Like, I'm no one to advise others. There's billions of people who've done this so much better than me. But in my own experience, you get so much more value out of everybody as a unit when they're able to really make mistakes. They're able to voice their opinions. They're able to challenge you. Otherwise, you just end up with this weird kind of child of yours, which has only got little bits of your idea and all these different people to execute. And I've been in organizations that have both, right? I've been in organizations that have extreme levels of the opposite, and I've seen what it does. And I've been in organizations which is fantastic at handling this. And the difference is just on another level. So what we've tried to create, and of course we're never doing it perfectly, what we're really trying to create is an area where all of the people that come into the business, whether they are the most entry-level position and they've just literally come out of school, or whether they are C-level and they've been in the game for 20, 30 years, it is the exact same level of contribution and impact that they have to the organization. They're allowed to challenge in the same way, speak in the same way, make the same levels of mistakes. And when those things happen, they're encouraged. Because without that, I just don't believe that innovation would ever be fostered. Innovation and great ideas don't come from me. They come from Nina more than me, but they don't come from Nina. They come from like the beating heart, which is our guides, right? It's the guys who are at the middle of everything. And just a wonderful example of this. So tomorrow, for example, we have this 2023 strategy day, and I'm so excited by it, because it's one of these opportunities where everyone there, they define the objectives, the OKRs for the business, of course, with our guidance and things like that. But it's this inside out, like top down, bottom up, the inside out approach that I really strongly believe in. And yeah, another just quick example, and here is, and I was recently having this conversation with someone, this is why I'm sharing it with you, where he came to me and he was like, look, all my guys they're taking a lot of sick days, and I don't know how to address this, because I don't want to be that guy that says you're sick too much. Who wants to be that guy? It's such a difficult thing to say.
It's an unenviable position, yeah.
Right? Well, you're sick too much? What do you mean? And I thought about it, and I spoke to my some other friends about it, and I kind of got to this realization through a lot of other people's input and help that, and again, this is just my personal preference, but like, we don't believe in having a number of sick days whatsoever, right? I think if you're at the point where someone is taking advantage of something like that and they are lying about it because and using it for unproductive things, or whatever it might be, then it's not a matter of your cultural policy is wrong. It's a matter of not having the right people in the business, or they're not being motivated in the right way. So you're not looking at the issue correctly. However, on the other side, if you trust someone enough that you just allow them to work the hours that they want, the sick days that they want, whatever kind of flexibility, and that they deliver, it's okay. They should be okay to just say, oh, you know what? I'm not feeling mentally great today, so I'm going to take a sick day. Like, I don't need a doctor's note for that. Like, if you're feeling rubbish, I felt rubbish. I want you to have the ability to come and say, I just feel crap. I'm just not going to turn up. I need that day. Because tomorrow you're going to come in and you're going to feel fantastic that you've been able to tell the truth and you don't have to hide anything behind anyone. So just, you trust people, and the right people will really, really pay you back for it. So I believe in that very, very strongly, as I'm sure you can see by my rambling. Yeah.
No, I agree, and just to kind of put a punctuation point on that, you're right. If you give people trust, that in itself is a motivating force, right? Yeah. I mean, if ultimately it is a culture issue, right? If people are taking advantage of your systems, right, and not motivated enough, I agree 100%. earlier you pointed at, and we're reaching the end of our time together, but I mean, earlier you pointed at what wonderful timing to be raising funds in this particular point in history. So I'm really curious. One, what was your experience raising funds in this environment?
Raising is so it's a long thing, and it's quite a draining exercise, of course, and you have a lot of heartbreak and you've got a lot of great moments, but it taught me so much. I really am so grateful for it, because you get to understand so much about your own business that you didn't before. And I think just raising, even if you don't need the money, is a really useful exercise strategically to just get feedback and advice about what you should be doing. So my approach has always been, I was taught this by a couple of previous mentors, was basically to always be raising. And what that means is meeting investors every 6 months or so, even if you don't need the money, just to check in, keep those relationships there, because one of a few things will happen. Number one, you're going to have an hour conversation with someone who's so much smarter than me that I'm going to learn a ton, and I'm going to be able to ask some really smart questions, get some even smarter answers, and that's free advice, right? That's already in itself a valuable reason. The second is, by keeping those relationships there and them understanding what you do, then when you actually come to really needing money, instead of starting from the beginning and having to, try to pretend that you're taking it slow, like you're dating, when actually you want to go straight to marriage, it's difficult. But you don't need to do that, because you've already built that foundation, so it becomes a much easier conversation. And then the third is referrals, right? Every single VC, investor, angel knows a ton of other people that can either help your business or another investor who might be interested. So I think that was the first kind of learning point, was definitely carve out the time to do that. I would advise all founders to carve out the time to do that, because the best time to raise is when you don't need to raise, right? But that's that, and so we started very, very early, before we actually kind of needed cash. We bootstrapped for the starting point, and eventually when it came to it, we just had some people who were too good to not, like, okay, now let's really go and hit the button and let's do this. And so, for example, the actual starting amount we wanted was 200K. We never anticipated raising this much. We just kept coming across someone else who can add something so interesting and so valuable to the business. I mean, Seedstars just themselves, like, it hasn't even been very long, and the amount of stuff they've done for us is ridiculous. Like, I really wouldn't have expected this. And our preference, by the way, was really on the angel side, because there you can expect a lot more in terms of actual involvement. You can kind of not really hold them accountable, but you can really kind of help control that situation as to how much you extract. But from a VC, we just weren't expecting it. But in those conversations, we were so sold, and we're going on the growth program for 3 months, which will be epic. And they've already introduced us to people that we've closed deals with, and that's really been fantastic. The other lesson that I've learned is just be bold and don't be afraid to just shoot your shot. So I'm referring to a few people here, but I'll just name Alan and Sagar in particular. So Alan Wong is the founder of Ulux, soon to be probably a unicorn in Indonesia. Brilliant ecom B2B business, and this guy was. And so I take a step back. I literally was researching who are the best tech people and ecom founders in Asia. Like, I just stupid research, really, because I identified that on our board we needed, I wanted another couple of real tech people, complete at a global kind of level. And it came up with, these top 10 lists of, XYZ, they're all over the place, of people to watch, etc. And Alan was at the top of this list. And so I just went to LinkedIn and I just reached out and was like, hey Alan, here's my deck, and kind of pitched it to him in an in-mail. And of course he replied being like, what the hell are you talking about? Of course not. I've got my own business to run. So I fought back and we kept, and after an exchange or two, he was like, okay, fair enough, let's have a chat. So we had a chat. He ended up then pulling in his his other business partner, Sagar, who's also just on a completely different level. And eventually they both decided to come in, and they put in money, and they actually now have an hourly conversation with me every month. And again, I tell you, I've never felt so stupid than sitting in a room with these two guys. It's absolutely mind-blowing. And I'm so pleased that I did. But it just goes to show that not every single investor needs to be found through the most perfect curated way. Right? They could be anywhere. We've had some that have needed to do 4 months of due diligence. We've had others who literally offered cash after an hour meeting. So it really ranges, and I think it's often a numbers game. And just final bit here, because we've now finally finished it and it's all fresh. The final thought is, once you get one solid person, utilize that to help get the rest. It really, really makes a difference. And I think, again, the Seed Star situation, a couple of our other big angels, once we locked them in and we said, like, who else do you think would be appropriate to this? The due diligence needed is so much less when it's like, oh, look, I've just invested in these guys. Are you interested? Just utilize that referral mechanism, and it really helped us.
Because at that point, you're a vetted entity, right?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly.
Leveraging trust, again, going back to that point. I'm reminded of that saying, the best way to get money is to ask for advice, and the best way to get advice is to ask for money. So, I mean, perfectly illustrated by your story there. I think just on a final point, because I really appreciate you carving out time for this conversation, Joseph. On a final point, it's a global recession that we're in. It's not just a concern, obviously, for founders raising funds. It's a concern for everybody, right?
Yeah.
And something we haven't touched on yet, and hopefully we can maybe end on this point, is Humble, through your many different efforts, you are providing opportunities for people and for businesses to earn more and to save more at this really critical point in time. So I'm just curious, how central is that idea to your mission at Humble? And maybe jumping off from there, where are you guys headed from here?
Massive. I think, again, yes, we are headed for a very, very tough time globally. I mean, we're in it now, but economically, it's not going to get a lot easier. But again, these situations are like, I don't know, like birthing grounds for innovation. And like, you look at some of the most, and it's boring here because I'm sure you've heard it billions of times, but the incredible startups that have been born in recessions. Right, and Airbnb is one of my favorite, most obvious examples, because during especially the housing crisis and the recession being hit so bad, everyone's like, okay, how do I make some extra money from like something which I already have, which before was not monetizable? So Airbnb come along and they give you an opportunity where now I can make a bit of extra cash out of this room, which before there was absolutely no clear, obvious, easy way to do that. So this is just creating money from nowhere at a time where there's serious need for those who need it the most. And I love their story, and there's tons more. So with us, I think, yes, we are headed straight for a recession. And what we're essentially doing is providing both sides of the marketplace with a way to either earn or save at a time where they really need it. So for businesses who are, again, e-com, etc., look at the layoffs that are happening, Amazon, the amount of traffic is really going down. This is going to happen all over the place. And because of that, there needs to be other ways to monetize and extract as much value as possible. So what we are trying to do is position ourselves in being able to help with that section of stuff, which previously has just been a cost and a headache, but we're helping them be able to reduce their costs and earn from something which otherwise before they were not able to do, and specifically through returns, damaged items, the stuff that everyone else forgets. So that's for businesses. We call them humblers, if you like. On the other side of it is the people and the businesses acquiring products. And I really believe so strongly in Thrift at this point in particular, because what we have is something very simple. We've got an option where you can buy something very high quality. It's a sustainable thing that's really good for the planet. You're doing something great, well done. Plus, it's discounted sincerely and 30-40% cheaper than anywhere else you find it online. just that in itself, we are giving people the opportunity to acquire stuff, which is great and nice, that they need, that they want, at a really, really low price while helping the earth. So I think this is a good time for us to be where we are with this investment and really focused on growth, and hopefully serve as many humblers and thrifters as we possibly can.
Brilliant. Well, I think it's a fantastic place to close off the conversation, Joseph. Thank you so much for your time again.
Thank you. Really enjoyed this. Thanks for listening to my ramblings. Cheers.
Cheers.